lights and sirens, yeah, it's time to go, no time to defund us. You should know that we're not perfect, we're human, we're flawed. Just save us some grace for the sake of us all. We're holding that thin blue line, 'cause that's what we do. We don't do it for the glory, we do it for you.
Hello, Vax Choice Clout Hub community. Thank you so much for joining us today for another episode of In the Lion's Den, hosted by Dr. Bill Lionberger. How are you doing today, Dr. Bill?
I'm doing excellent. You know, a lot going on around the country. We have a lot to discuss today. Great topics and amazing guests. So looking forward to the show.
Yep, me as well. We've got one reoccurring guest, Ann Vandersteel. If you're unfamiliar with her, she is a fearless investigative journalist and constitutional advocate. She's leading the charge to expose corruption and defend American freedom. She's the host of Steele News and chair of the American Made Foundation, and reports from the front lines, whether it's uncovering the January 6th entrapment, documenting the invasion at our border, or standing with the patriots fighting for truth and justice. She's a trailblazer in alternative media. She's earned a reputation for integrity, courage, and insider access, featuring top voices like General Michael Flynn and Steve Bannon. Through the American Made Foundation, she champions government accountability. She supports wrongfully incarcerating the January 6 defendants and delivers real solutions for restoring our republic. She's not just reporting on history, she's shaping it. And we're also lucky to have a new guest on the show that's also with Ann, is Maureen Steele. She is a visionary strategist at the crossroads of media, law, and movement building. As co-founder of American Made, she's dedicated her career to crafting powerful narratives, forging meaningful connections, and driving strategies that inspire action. With a rare blend of legal insight, media expertise, and creative brilliance, Maureen transforms ideas into movements and partnerships into lasting legacies. Through her American Made essay series, she's shining a light on the strength and resilience of the American workforce, celebrating the spirit that keeps this nation moving forward. And as a dynamic spokesperson and relationship architect, Maureen seamlessly bridges the world of finance, law, and storytelling. Her work amplifies voices, builds trust, and sparks transformation wherever she goes. So we've got two powerful women on today, and I look forward to hearing what they have to say. I'll be in the background, Dr. Bill.
Fantastic. Today's show in the Lion's Den is Taken, State-Sanctioned Kidnapping. Really incredibly important topic that we need to discuss. We have experts here that are on the inside of that problem. And we also have a country that's just gone through some elections, which are quite telling. And I wanted to get into that first in the show today. And with that, I'd like to invite both of our guests onto the show, Ann Vandersteel and Maureen Steele. Welcome to you both.
Hey, Bill, good to be with you.
Hi, Bill. Good to be here.
It's great to have you both. You know, with an amazing topic that we have today, now we've got this election cycle, and, you know, my phone kind of lit up with people, you know, all of a sudden hitting the worry button and, you know, what do we do now button? And maybe give us some of your insights, because you work with a lot of these people on the legislative side, and you're kind of on the inside of this machinery. Tell us what you know.
Well, I don't know if you want to call us on the inside of the machinery, because we're actually fighting the machinery, and we're bringing the tools to take it out from the outside, which is really where the people are. We're not part of this corrupt system, but I think what we witnessed yesterday was literally an extension of the mass weaponized human migration, the illegals that have flooded our country, the foreign invaders, so to speak, in concert with the red-green axis of the Muslim Brotherhood and communists that are intent on destroying America. This has been the agenda for a long time. That's why they use the oldest trick in the book of weaponized human migration to change the face of the electorate, to bring redistricting that passed in California, which is exactly what you don't need more of. And this is the result of, the elections in California and Florida, in New York yesterday, are going to result in more people flooding Florida, which is the good news, bad news. The good news is our real estate market is going to rebound quickly. The bad news is those people typically bring their same ideologies that created the problems in which they voted in to our state, and we don't want that here. So it's, the battle continues. The illegal, the mail-in ballot fraud, the down ballot theft of country is happening at the local level. And, you know, the Soros-funded machine, the NGOs funding the machine continue. And until we get a handle on this, until we have same-day elections, paper ballots, hand-counted voter ID, we will continually be victimized by a corrupt system.
You know, we've seen this Democratic Party pretty much in shambles since the election. While they're very good at finding and raising money behind the scenes and funneling it where they need to. I mean, this guy raised huge amounts of money. It was given to him, funneled into his program with really no justification for him actually even running to be able to handle the office. But at the end of the day, we see this party that has had to reach so far down into the group to grab a guy like this. You know, how far left can you go, right? I mean, a Palestinian, person who basically, all of these ties to these other groups like Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, etc., that go back to the money funnel. They're really reaching, right? I mean, you'd think that they could come up with some other kind of candidate that's not going to take them that far.
But no, they're not going to. Bill, they're not going to reach for another candidate. They've already got control of the apparatus. They have control of the election machines. They have control of the judicial apparatus. For all intents and purposes, they control Congress through lobbyists like AIPAC. So the machine is going to continue to grind the gears down on the American Republic so long as the American Republic continues to allow this. And so we're at this point now in history, like our founding fathers did 250 years ago, where we have to, we can't comply our way out of this. We can't vote our way out of this. It's been proven yet again that they're going to steal elections. They're going to pad the mail-in ballots. They're going to continue to stuff ballots with fake mail-in ballots. We have got to have a wholesale liquidation of the corporation that is in control of this country. And it's going to require the people, like our founding fathers did, to not comply. And you can do it peacefully. You don't have to be violent, but we have got to stop contributing to the system that's got control of our republic. They've overlaid a corporatocracy through U.S. codes on top of the constitutional republic. And we're not governed by the Constitution. We're governed by these U.S. codes, which really apply to corporations. They're code, statutes, mandates. We have got to stop trying to comply our way through it. It's not going to work.
Maureen, maybe you can weigh in with some of your insight from your perspective where you see it.
Oh, I agree with Ann. I think we're living in a country that is a corporatocracy and a democracy. They've overlaid a democracy on top of our beloved constitutional republic. We don't have a constitutional republic anymore, and we haven't for years. So, it's lawless, and it's been, Article 2 of the Constitution is what's running the show right now, which is basically a monarchy. I mean, it is mob rule, it is a monarchy, and that's just where we're at. And the people have been, I think, dumbed down for generations for a reason. They don't understand civics. They don't understand even what a constitutional republic is. And so here we are, ignorance has taken over, and now we're voting in, Islamists that are, as we speak right now, celebrating in New York that they're taking over and that Islam is the only religion and that they won't stop until everyone is part of that, part of Sharia law and part of Islam, which is 100% against our Constitution, which will tell you our Constitution is inactive. Because if it was, the military would be going out cleaning up this mess. The Constitution has been suspended for years.
It also reminds me that, this last election, we saw a galvanization of counties around the country that turned red. That basically, brought us 90% of the counties that came to the ballot box and made their views known by the way they voted. And this kind of extreme far left, candidate, it's a mayoral, position, right? But this type of thing is what galvanizes people like that and drives them to drive forward and make change and say, you know what, I've had enough of this. What do I need to do? I think we need more and more of that. And this is like a wake-up call. We really have to look at it like a wake-up call, right?
I think it is a wake up call, but again, the answer to the people, as opposed to really understanding what happened, is to just leave. And I get it. If you don't like where you are, good news is in a constitutional republic, we have different states with, different governors. Although I have to say, unless we start getting serious, that's all being homogenized as well. And so you can leave New York because you don't like what's happened to New York City, and you can move to Florida freely. Maureen and I were talking on the way over here. We'd like to see Florida say, okay, you want to move from New York to Florida? You're going to answer these questions, and you're going to agree that you're not going to vote a certain way because we don't want to have our state go down the same horrific path that your city just did. And they tend to forget that they're bringing this ideology that lends itself to a socialist takeover of a constitutional republic. In New York City, might as well just become part of, Afghanistan at this point. It has become so incredibly, like Minnesota has been taken over by a bunch of Somalis that believe in Sharia law. That is incompatible with our Constitution. There is no question about it.
Bill, thanks so much for letting me rejoin and finish that thought. We had unfortunate technical difficulties when we were on the road last week. So I want to get back to what we were talking about with respect to Mandami and Sharia law. Let me make this really crystal clear for you and your audience. From where I'm sitting, and I think a lot of Americans would agree with me, Sharia law has absolutely no place in the United States, period. Our Constitution is the supreme law of the land. The First Amendment forbids government from establishing religion. Remember, this is why we bailed on King George III. We said, we're not just going to worship in the Church of England. So that means any attempt to impose religious, legal code, Islamic, Christian, or otherwise, is flat out unconstitutional. Yes, we're a Christian nation, but you can't impose that, just like you can't impose Sharia law. They're not even compatible. Now we're starting to hear from people throw around Sharia law in New York City like it's some kind of new policy idea. It's not. It's fear, confusion, and in some cases, Bill, I think it's totally deliberate propaganda. But here's the reality. If anyone ever tried to replace the United States civil law with religious law, they'd be violating the very foundation of our republic. Equal protection, due process, free speech, poof, all gone. So no, America will not be bending the knee to any theological rule book. We're a nation under God, yes, but governed by the Constitution, which means we the people. And the moment we let any religion write our laws, we cease to be free. That's the fight. That's the line. And we're not moving it.
And the folks that want to push that and, act like it's the new big thing on the block, it's not. It's been coming for a long time in terms of infiltration, if you will, infiltrating our public offices, infiltrating our communities, and we've got to raise the awareness, raise the bar of that, so people go, oh wow, that's what that is, because all the things that you said are all the reasons and more why we need to vote them down, because just like the Chinese, they play the long game. It's a slow get in there, slowly, until they control, right? And what do you have in New York right now? You're going to have a complete disaster, really.
That's right.
I wanted to switch over to today's topic, the state-sanctioned kidnapping, which is extremely important. You've done a tremendous amount of work on this. I've seen some of your work, and I really want to blow this out and bring this home to people to understand really what's been going on, because you want to think that your state agencies are there to try to help you, when actually they've been working in another capacity with all kinds of other reasons, financial being a huge one, with all the mouths to feed, and all of the damage and trauma being done to families, in the guise of we're here to help you when we're not,
Right.
and all of the prongs that build that out, and what do people have to contend with. And maybe when we finish up this segment, we're going to talk about some things about how to protect yourself against some of that, and ways to arm yourself, and awareness in most situations helps you arm yourself, because if you deal with these things on the front end better or more, you may not have to deal with it as much on the back end potentially. So anyway, I'm going to have you launch us into it.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about state-sanctioned kidnapping, because for those people that don't know who and what Child Protective Services is, and that is a generic moniker, 3-letter moniker for agencies that exist in all 50 states. under the American Children and Families through Social Security Administration, HHS. You have the Parents, if you will, organization. And the Social Security Administration, through Health and Human Services, distributes billions of dollars across all 50 states into their own respective child protective services organizations. Some go by the name Department of Children and Families, like they do here in Florida. Some of them are Department of Social Services. Some are CPS. They all have different names, but for the most part, they're all three-letter acronyms. And what they represent is, in fact, an insidious public-private partnership that includes judges. It includes law enforcement. It includes counselors. It includes guardian ad litems. It includes, state-funded attorneys to represent the families, et cetera, and to represent the state. This is a closed group of people who have figured out, because of very significant federal dollars that roll into these programs, how to milk the system. And based on hearsay, just hearsay alone, through mandated reporters like pediatricians, like school teachers, police officers, and others that might have a reason to suspect, or a cause maybe to suspect, not actual evidence, but a cause to suspect. Nothing beyond a reasonable doubt, just a cause to suspect, can report on a 51A form that Child Protective Services for that state will either screen in or screen out. And for the most part, they screen them in and they intake these children without ever real due process and real evidence. And this is, in fact, a travesty that is happening across millions of families in this country. In Massachusetts, we highlighted recently a family known as the Rivera family, Encarnacion family, Izzy Rivera and Ruth Encarnacion, who are the parents of 5 beautiful children. Their youngest, at 9 months old, last February, went in for a well visit at his pediatrician. This pediatrician happened to be born in Iran, trained in Tehran, and decided, because Mr. Rivera did not want to give his 9-month-old a vitamin K shot. Dr. Bill, you're a doctor. Vitamin K shots aren't mandatory. In fact, none of these so-called vaccines are mandatory at all. But they are mandated in some instances, and you can choose to, take them or not. It's not a law. This pediatrician reported Mr. Rivera for not taking the vitamin K shot for his 9-month-old. He said, no, on religious grounds, we're declining the vitamin K shot. That set off a report in which the Department of Children and Families in Massachusetts started to, knock on the doors of the Rivera Encarnacion family, demanding to see not only the baby, but then the other 4 children. Even though the child got a perfect well visit, there was nothing wrong with the child, considered healthy. And that cascade with law enforcement and CPS, or I should say DCF, showing up, harassing the family, basically forced the family to leave their house and move to Texas. They didn't want to be harassed anymore. While they were gone, stapled to their door was a so-called warrant that was not properly signed by a judge, nor properly serviced. Sticking something on somebody's door is not proper service, as you know, also being in law enforcement. And what ended up happening was they sent that warrant to the state of Texas when they found out the family had moved there, where the state of Texas then sent the U.S. Marshals, and at gunpoint, 15 or 20 U.S. Marshals at gunpoint removed the parents out of the house in front of their children, had them arrested in prison in Texas for 30 days, $2.5 million each, mom and dad, and then extradited back to Massachusetts, where they were held with bail. And it was ridiculous. The mom got out in a week at $7,500. The dad, it took 6 weeks and $25,000. So this is a total miscarriage of justice, no due process ever involved. And the mother's case, after 10 months, was finally dismissed for no criminal wrongdoing, because she was charged, as was the father, with familial kidnapping. Again, right, over a vitamin K shot that is not mandatory, not required, and that parents were well within their constitutional rights to turn it down. This is the kind of stuff that happens over and over, Bill, all across the country.
There's several things here that I think are really important to ferret out, because, people might not know what a 51A form is, and so, we as physicians have a reporting requirement, and these are state forms. Right. If we run into a medical neglect issue, a real one, right? If somebody came in, little Johnny has been abused, he's got bruises, all kinds of things. And, it raises that question mark of what's going on. He didn't just fall. Where'd all these other ones come from, right? The kind of thing you might think about, it might raise your question mark. Here, we're talking about vaccines, all right? And this is a huge topic because these medical practitioners, and we run into them on our side of the fence where patients will go into the doctor's office, a pediatrician, been patients for years, and then all of a sudden, they're hit with here's another, cycle of 7 more, and they're like, wait a minute, I think I'm gonna hold back on that, and they get browbeat, kicked out of the office, or maybe one of these forms, right, filled out against them because they're not playing ball with pharma, with the doctor, etc. And they're literally like the starting point for a lot of these folks. And the terminology is so diffuse. When I review it, I look at the terminology, and suspected child abuse or neglect. What does that mean? Let's see. How did the parents' decision to not do a vitamin K shot fall into suspected child abuse? And how, doctor, would you articulate that?
Right.
Nobody seems to care, right? Nobody cares, but he hit the form button, and now we've got CPS spinning up, going, oh boy, we've got another one, right? Because they prey on the folks that don't have the financial wherewithal. They prey with these kind of things, and the confines of rules for this are diffuse and unspecified, and they can almost do anything that they want with, against you. And that's how they chase them down into another state, right?
Right.
And all of a sudden now you're leaving the state with your own child because you don't want to deal with this tyrant.
Correct.
And you're leaving the state, and now they're going to chase you down and say, you've kidnapped your own kid. How do you articulate that in court? And why is it that they finally drop the charges? Because they know they're bogus.
That's right.
And
this is the travesty, Bill. They still haven't dropped the charges to the father. The children still have not been reunited with the Rivera family, which is absolutely absurd at this point. I mean, it's so beyond absurd. We brought a lot of media attention to this. We actually did a documentary on AmericanMadeFoundation.org. Our website is the documentary featured called Taken, State-Sanctioned Kidnapping. We've written a book that'll be published, and you'll be able to get it on Amazon here any day now, called CPS Pipeline, State-Sanctioned Kidnapping, where we go through all the various things that happen. We highlight this case, but we talk about it in generalities of the fact that they use medical kidnapping across the country as an opportunity, frankly, to grab children. There's another case we're working with in North Carolina right now, the Boyce family, where their youngest son has been battling ALL, leukemia, for the past several years. He followed the St. Jude affiliate Hembley Children's Hospital, Novant Hembley Children's Hospital's protocol for treatment of ALL to the letter. And because they were also, doing adjuvant therapy of their own, they live on an organic farm. They're organic farmers. They have 4 children. Now he's 8 years old, their son. Is doing very well. He's thriving because of all of the additional alternative treatments they're doing to enhance his ability to discharge the chemotherapy, the poison in his body. And because he's processing it so well, when he goes in for blood tests, yes, they can see he's adhering to the protocol, but because he's too healthy. He's too healthy after 2 years of chemo. They're claiming the parents aren't following the protocol. Parents spent $5,000 last month, Bill, to hire a nurse, to videotape their son taking their meds every day, and to documenting this and signing a sworn affidavit on all of this. And they still made a referral because they told the parents, if we find out you're not doing this, we're referring you to CPS. They made it anyway. So now CPS, who was there for one child, is now there knocking on the door, wanting to see all the children, and they're not going away, no matter how nice you are to them. This is the creep, the insidious creep of medical kidnapping through CPS.
So can you run us through the Title IX prevention piece of this in terms of the financial incentives?
I think you mean Title 4E.
I mean, Title 4E, excuse me, Title 4E.
Yeah, I say Title IX is for women's funding in sports. So you had me for a loop there, but I quickly picked up what you were.
No, it's Title 4E.
Sure. So the Title 4E funding comes from the Social Security Administration's funding mechanism, which is, again, under the Health and Human Services umbrella, a $3 trillion a year agency. It's the biggest behemoth out there. And this Title 4E funding basically has matching funds for the states. It's a 75-25 split. So 75% comes from the federal government, 25% is state matching funds. And so overall, the overarching number, the latest numbers we have when it comes to this as an industry with cottage industries and parasitic organizations all encompassing, because there's a lot of NGOs, nonprofits, et cetera, that are attached to these various CPS agencies in all 50 states, whether it's guardian ad litems, whether it's counselors or it's pediatricians or what have you. This is about an $81 to $85 billion a year cottage industry as a whole. So when you look at the numbers, it's staggering. And then you look at how this started, going back to 1924 under International Social Services in Geneva, Switzerland. And then it gave birth to, here in 1935, it gave birth to what we would consider the then CPS organization. This has continued to grow and grow and grow. And every year they add more money, which means there's more incentive to have more cottage industries, more parasitic organizations to come in and feed off the carcass of the family that has been ripped apart. And why on earth would there be any financial incentive to reunify the families? There's lots of money for foster families to adopt. In fact, states get bonuses based on the rate of adoption. So Bill, if your family is split and they take your little children that are under 18 and put them into the foster care program, there is an incentive to keep them in foster and then to have them adopted out by a foster family, because that family gets payments on this. There's no incentive to reunify financially whatsoever. So this is what has become so insidious. This is why our organization, American Made Action, our 501c4, has taken it upon ourselves to write legislation and to sue in federal and state court against these agencies, but also to work with the local legislatures like we are here in Florida to rewrite legislation to de-incentivize that type of behavior. We're going to take this elephant down. Our goal is to literally cut the funding out of Health and Human Services Title 4E so that we get back to, the community supporting its members in the community. Similar to, I live in Florida. If we have a hurricane, FEMA's not knocking on my door first, probably not even the sheriff, but my next door neighbor is. They're going to check on me to make sure I'm okay. We need to get back to that sort of mentality, and we need to get away from the nanny state mentality where big brother, big government is going to come and protect you from the bad guys. Because from where we're sitting, the majority of the cases that are currently in the CPS pipeline, Massachusetts, for instance, just under 95% of the families that have had their children taken do not meet the legal threshold for removing those children. That's how much of a financial incentive there is to keep the system going.
And where's the incentive? Where's the money to protect? And where's besides a public defender, on the criminal side? I mean, these are civil cases.
Right.
So, the bar is 51% when you go to court. But where's the protections for the families, because they're having to foot the bill themselves, right?
You're absolutely right. Well, first of all, you're in a family court that's an administrative court. There is no jury of your peers. So already you're getting hearsay dragging you in there. There's no due process when they are not getting proper warrants served and they're just taking your children and having you arrested. And then, of course, you're not getting that jury of your peers. So really, your constitutional rights are being violated up one side and down the other. There is no incentive for the courts to do anything different because they're getting paid one way or the other. And you, the family, you can say, okay, uncle, I'll just take the state appointed attorney who's part of that network, right? And they're getting paid to represent you. I've witnessed it when I sat in court cases. You speak to some of the most eloquent court watchers like Melinda Sherwin, who's done this for 30 years sitting in these family court cases. It's insane what they do. It's absolutely insane. And it's so rare when you see a family who becomes terrorized because they can't afford a private attorney. Sure. And they think, well, if I just play nicely with, my attorney, my court appointed attorney, and I do what their CPS, counselors or investigators are doing. Mind you, these investigators are 25 years old half the time with a little clipboard and a pen, and they've got the almighty power of the state behind them. So they think they're God and can do anything. And they love to watch you squirm. They think if they play nicely with these little tyrants, that the tyrant is going to be nice to them the next time. Name one time in history when you complied your way out of tyranny. It just doesn't happen.
Now, there's an interesting thing. The Supreme Court ruled on the Chevron deference,
Right.
right? And can you run us through the importance of that piece?
Sure. So in the Loper Bright case, the Chevron deference was overturned by the Supreme Court, which essentially said, and I'm going to break it down in lay speak. It
Right.
essentially said that these agencies like the CDC, the FDA, HHS, whatever, they can no more write law than legislate law. They're supposed to be regulatory guideposts. They're supposed to say, hey, this thing you're doing over there in that particular industry, you don't want to do that because it's really not safe for the public, right? They're supposed to be guideposts and there's supposed to be oversight. They've now become judge, jury, and executioner. They're writing the laws. They're creating these statutes and these codes and ordinances. It's all administrative. It's all part of the U.S. code, which doesn't apply to we the people. We are under the constitutional umbrella of the republic, and those things don't apply to us. That applies to agency and how they operate. Unfortunately, they're transposing those rules, codes, statutes, and ordinances on us and expecting us to be, part of that citizenry over there in the legislative democracy. They're totally incongruous. So Loper Bright said, hey, we're going to put the agencies back in the box. They're there as guideposts. They can no longer tell you, the people, what you're doing right or what you're doing wrong, and they can't legislate you, and they can't enforce anything. So in fact, what's happening is that that's being completely ignored. They still haven't complied with their own, and just like they never do, they create rules, codes, and statutes, and they ignore their own rules. And so here we are, thinking we were going to get, some freedom, tyranny, we'd be unshackled, because Loper Bright was overturned and the Chevron doctrine was overturned, and they were going to get put back in the box. And we've yet to see the box open up and swallow these agencies back up again. They're still out there running roughshod. Hence, we're going after the funding, because the only way we can see to combat these before we get them ruled unconstitutional and abolished is to take the money away from these agencies.
And an example of the power of the Rivera is, right, we're sitting there at gunpoint.
Yep.
With these agencies doing all of those things, right? And setting all those things in motion. Think about the power of that. I mean, the power is almost unsurmountable.
That's right.
Really, when you think about it, and it's going to take lawsuits and suing, and it's going to take, like you say, lots of lawfare here to, enforce now the existing Supreme Court rendering,
Right.
and get the judges to start following the law. Imagine that, right? But I think it's an important piece, that begins the rung on the ladder to be able to climb up and battle this thing.
That's right.
It's going to take a lot more, but it's just so outlandish to see the power that they bring, and how hard it is to buck the system.
Well, it's like an elephant. How do you take it down, Bill? One bite at a time. And so, frankly, that's what we're doing at AmericanMadeAction.org. We are not only filing lawsuits at the state level, at the federal level. We're also using, we've got folks in the common law. We've got folks in the court of equity that understand equity law. And so we're coming at them like our own fifth generation warfare. We're coming at this problem from multiple different jurisdictions, essentially, to attack this, and rewriting legislation to make more teeth in it for we the people. Frankly, we need to go back to citizen grand juries, and that got taken away from us. In the early, I think it was 1947, I believe. I'd have to fact check my date on that. I'm not sure I'm 100% right on the date, but frankly, we lost, the very first paragraph of the due process clause under the Fifth Amendment, where citizens can form a grand jury. We don't need to be appointed by a special prosecutor or any of that. The whole point of the Fifth Amendment was for us to be able to hold our elected officials accountable, and we've had that stripped from us. Our rights as citizen grand juries has been taken, and so we've got to fight to put that back in. And we need to start acting as if it is in existence. Their act that they did to pull that out doesn't work. It's completely unconstitutional, and so at this point, we are. The only thing we can do at this point, Bill, is to not comply. We simply cannot comply with anything they're doing. We have to go the opposite direction and peacefully just not comply. And that means across every aspect where agency government isn't interfering in your lives. Take the IRS, for instance, right? You don't have to file a return. It's not mandatory for you to file a tax return. As a free people living on this planet, in our In America, you do not need to file. You don't live in Washington, D.C. You don't work for Washington, D.C. You're not in the government. You don't need to file a tax return. It's that simple. It says it in their own statutes, but they'll have you believe through obfuscation and word salads that everybody's supposed to file a tax return because of the propaganda they wage on us. And this
So
is
that
what
to the
this is what
accountant,
we have to deal with.
say that to your accountant and watch their eyebrows lift up because
Well, they'll be out of a job again. They're
Right.
regulated by the same agencies. So, they don't want to lose their gravy train. They've made millions of dollars on the backs of filing tax returns for people that unwittingly didn't know they needed to file.
So back when we had the whole COVID debacle and we were trying to figure out ways to deal with craziness and what was coming down and finding ways to deal with the problem. Here,
Mhm.
you've got all of a sudden you've got a spouse that you're in conflict with, and they make a phone call to CPS, and now you got somebody banging on your door with a police officer,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
It can be that simple. It has nothing to do with any piece of reality at all. It can be just retribution from a spousal thing or whatever. But at the end of the day, maybe there are some things to be aware of, some signals and ways to be aware and know how to manage your rights, what to say, what not to say, and basically see these things coming. So maybe you can not be cornered as much. You have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's really comes down to, this is an agency. They really don't have any authority over you, but we submit because we believe they do. And the first thing you should do is not answer the door. You simply don't need to answer any questions whatsoever. If there was a law broken and there was somebody who was violently attacked and there was actual evidence, real evidence of harm done, then that's a different story. It usually gets led by a police officer knocking on your door. But when
Exigent
you see somebody,
circumstances.
pardon me?
We call that exigent circumstances.
Exigent
Right.
circumstances, correct. But in majority of these cases, that is not the situation. It is simply a mandated reporter who has a cause to believe or they suspect possibly, but they can't prove it. There's no hard evidence. It's just that's what they're going to do. And we see this time and time again. And so when that person with the clipboard shows up at your door and says they're there from Department of Children and Families or Child Protective Services or Department of Social Services, and they want to see little Johnny or little Susie and ask you questions, you don't need to answer the door. It is that simple. And again, in the case of the Riveras, they chose not to speak to these people. They chose to leave. They planted, they taped a warrant to the door without proper judicial signature. And then they issued that warrant to the state of Texas. Now, this lawsuit that's getting leveled in the state of Massachusetts and federally is going to be, is going to include the state of Texas because unfortunately, the state of Texas was duped into believing it was a valid warrant to arrest the Riveras. And so they issued the arrest warrant to the U.S. Marshals, who will also be dragged into this lawsuit because, again, it was really an erroneous warrant. And that is why the case was dismissed against Mrs. Encarnacion, the mother. And that is exactly why the case against Mr. Rivera will be dismissed as well.
Well, warrants need to be served, right?
Correct.
Slapping
It
something on
was
a
never
door,
served.
slapping something on the door, I don't think meets the test of being served.
No.
You'd have to get with the attorneys and have them battle through that one. But at the end of the day, I mean, they made the best choice that they were thinking they could make for their family. They weren't fleeing anything other than I've got some tyrant CPS person who's dogging me on,
A vitamin K shot.
vitamin K shots.
What? Show me the law where you have to do that, Bill. Show me the law and I'll eat my hat.
And they typically will come once or twice, and then they'll come to the door with a law enforcement officer and, well, where's the warrant? Because they'll come even without the warrant. They'll come
Right.
just with, for somebody to say, well, keeping the peace, we're going to bring them here to keep the peace, giving you the impression that they have a lot more power than they do when they really don't.
That's right.
And so I've seen some people also say, well, show me the warrant, and they can't show the warrant. It's like, go pound sand. I'm not
Exactly.
going to do anything to help you out here. But I think the less you give someone in that regard, it's like, pleading the fifth, right? You don't have to.
I was just going to say your Fifth Amendment is really important here because anything you say can and will be used against you
Right.
in a court of law. So don't say anything at all because the minute you start talking, you have now surrendered your Fifth Amendment right. By the way, that applies to your 1040 return. I just want to make sure people are aware of that. When you sign your name on your 1040 and you give it to the government saying, hey, I'm volunteering to give you how much money I made and donate a portion of that to you. When you sign that, that is a surrender of your Fifth Amendment right to, anything that you can and say will be used against you in a court of law. Now they have the right to go into everything and use it against you if they decide your math didn't add up on that 1040. Just saying, folks, wanted to slide that in there. Sorry, Bill.
That's okay. I wanted to kind of segue over to, I know that you're working with these folks to figure out ways to battle this. A family that finds themselves being trapped because they're trying to trap you, right?
Right.
They have financial incentives to trap you. They have all of these mouths to feed to trap you. It's really a racket. You could almost call it racketeering, really, the way that it's set up. And, finding a way to exit that is really the key here. Are there is there anything else that you can think of or that you guys are working with that gives the family a way to either fight back or deal with that?
Well, American Made Action has our United Law Coalition. And on our website, AmericanMadeAction.org, under the United Law Coalition, we have a couple of things that I think would be of interest to not only to the Rivera family, which they're well aware of, but also to others. Is that, we have a team of lawyers that go across, from coast to coast that are willing to work with, and we work with other organizations like the Pacific Justice Institute to provide nonprofit attorneys and also for hire attorneys for people that are in this position to help them, get themselves out of the claws of tyranny. Because when you sit there with a court appointed attorney, the chances of you actually getting in and out of this case quickly is probably zero. They're going to keep you in there for at least 2 years because that's what they can do to milk as much money as possible out of you in the system. So there's that. But the other thing that we're doing, because we're so invested in rewriting legislation, as I said, one bite at a time to take down this behemoth of an elephant, is modifying legislation to give you, the parent, more protections and more sovereignty and protect your God-given, constitutionally protected rights as a parent to protect your children from tyranny. So this is where we're rewriting legislation, and we're starting in Florida, and we believe this legislation will probably be modified per state statutes across the country very quickly. Because it's already starting to gain a lot of traction with other people contacting us saying, hey, we hear what you're doing. We love what you're doing. We want to do it too. And so, this is what we do in our organization, is to change the top, what's happening up here, so that the people that are being totally caught up in the system can be released. And we believe that ultimately what we'd like to do is completely dismantle the entire CPS apparatus, because at the end of the day, Bill, when the majority of the cases don't meet the legal threshold and it's there just to siphon money off people, we now know that the community can absorb those cases for those families that really are in bad straits. In other words, if there's a family seriously in need of help, mom's a junkie, dad's an alcoholic, whatever the case is, whatever it is, your community is there for you, always has been. But when you impose the state and you constantly propagandize people to believe that the state's going to take care of these things and always turn to the state for your solutions, when that's the ethos in which people are operating, it's hard to retrain. So we believe you got to remove and replace. And it comes with a real, mass education campaign. And we're working with organizations like America's Future, Mary Flynn O'Neill, who, this is a subject near and dear to her heart because her grandchildren were taken by CPS. And she knows this system very, very well. She understands child trafficking, which is what CPS is ostensibly doing. So we believe we can partner with communities all over the country to actually provide the services needed and the help needed if a family is truly in crisis.
The one piece we haven't talked about, which is at the very top of the conversation is the trauma.
Right.
We've got child trauma. We've got family trauma.
Right.
We have lifelong trauma being imparted. Families that are being separated will never be the same in some regard after being separated and put into these environments, and where the incentive financially is to permanently separate them. And so
Yeah.
where's the mechanism to deal with the family trauma? You're just kind of left on your own, right?
That's exactly right. And they do provide social services and counseling for the children. And, but again, you're right. If I had a dime for every time I've heard a child, on an audio tape or something, I want my mom, I want my dad, I want to go home. There's no amount of counseling while that child is being separated from his parent that is going to solve the crisis that is immediately, at hand. These children need to all be reunited with their parents. Let's face it, not every family is perfect. God knows mine isn't. I don't think anybody can say that their family is perfect, but an imperfect family is still better than somebody's family that isn't yours. And
Right.
in 95% of these cases, that rule applies across the board. So, to deal with the emotional devastation, some of these children will never fully heal. Think about this 9-month-old, right? He was 9 months old in February. It is now November. We're talking 9 more months. He is 18 months old, probably saying his first words and walking and stuff. His mom and dad were deprived of seeing that and of being a part of that growth experience for their youngest child. Who is ever going to get over that? How are the parents going to reconcile that? And how is the child going to reconcile that? Because the most important impressions of this child's life are happening right now. And
Right.
instead of being with mom and dad who truly love him, he's in foster care. This is completely unacceptable. Yet this goes on and on and on, and families across this country from coast to coast every day. And then we wonder why we have crime and we have all sorts of dissociative disorders for these children that grow up. It's because of the situation and the system we have right now that is financially incentivized to keep these children from being reunified with their parents.
I wanted to bring Melissa back in and do a little bit of Q&A. She's been standing behind, kind of listening to all of this information, which a lot of people probably aren't aware of, unless it's really you're facing it. You kind of, it's not in your world, but it's a critical thing out there for the folks that, this all of a sudden shows up on their doorstep. Melissa, what questions do you have for Ann at this point?
Yeah, so I know you guys have kind of said, that they want to milk every penny out of the parents and things like that, but what's really the end goal other than traumatizing children to be taking them away from their parents' home for little things? Like, it's become a thing where parents, like you mentioned, are afraid to say that they don't vaccinate their child in a hospital setting in fear of getting their children taken away in some of these really bad states like California, New York, Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, different things like that. Why do they care so much about taking the kids away from the parents? What's the end goal?
Money. It's money. It truly is money. And I will say this, and this is a very disturbing thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway, and because it was documented in a public setting. Then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo under Trump 1 put out a trafficking in persons report that the Department of State does every single year. Every year they put out a trafficking in persons report. In 2019, Mike Pompeo's organization's trafficking in persons report clearly stated that child predators basically prey upon foster care homes as their number one place to go and find children for trafficking and sexual exploitation. It's right there in the report. It couldn't be stated any more plainly than that. And after what I've witnessed through Operation Burning Edge and the work we did with Michael Yan and our team down on the border and in Panama, the amount of children we saw coming across the border with people that were clearly not their family, only furthers the fuel for the fact that these kids, along with whistleblowers from HHS themselves and from NGOs that move these kids around in massive warehouses and into private homes in the middle of the night, flying them on planes, these children are being trafficked for sex. And then we all know the worst part of it all. When the children's bodies can no longer tolerate the sex and they're thoroughly used up, then they're parted out for organs and they're harvested. It is a sick and insidious, disgusting, satanic business. But unfortunately, HHS and your tax dollars are neck deep in funding all of this. And, like I said, these children that are in the system, that are in foster care, hopefully the majority of them don't end up like that. And I don't believe they do. But there is a significant portion. And the illegals that have come across the border that don't have birth certificates and you can't track who they belong to, most definitely are ending up in this horrific situations. And this must be stopped because my tax dollars, your tax dollars, however these tax dollars are generated, should not, and I damn well sure don't want them being, part of the system that is furthering that satanic, culture. It's just, it's abhorrent.
Do you have another question, Melissa?
Yes. So is this a place where our constitutional sheriffs can be engaged to push back against these departments enrolling the police to intimidate parents?
Absolutely. And the constitutional sheriff should be, because they are elected by we the people. And these constitutional sheriffs work for we the people. They don't work for the county. They work for us, the people. Unfortunately, because our counties and our states are all incorporated and we're all sub corporations of the United States Corporation, it's a little bit convoluted, and so their paycheck comes from a corporation, and therefore there's conflict for some of these peace officers, and I understand that because they have to raise a family also. But we've spoken to sheriffs, and they've said, listen, if we could be assured that we would get paid, we're not trying to get rich, but that if they cut our salary, we'll continue to operate. People have said, we'll do the private funding of this because we want you to enforce the law. We want you to protect us from these predators and these agencies. And to be very clear, the constitutional sheriffs have the law on their side when they can say, we don't want federal intervention in here, and they need to push back on the states as well with their agencies, because those agencies are transgressing your constitutional due process rights to have true evidence and brought in to prove the statements coming out of CPS. You're abusing, you're medically neglected, whatever it is. They've got to provide hard evidence, of which they most of the times never do. And that's where the sheriff needs to stand up and push back. So absolutely, it's critical that we get constitutional sheriffs on board and pushing back against the state agencies.
Okay. And kind of a two-parter question is, people think sex trafficking and child trafficking and just trafficking in general is this foreign concept, that it's happening in other countries, not here in America, even though America is like one of the number one purchasers of child-related material or people in general.
Mm-hmm.
What are signs that we can look for when a child is actually in a dangerous situation, or something that we can recognize on the outside, especially having a lot of immigration in the recent years to the country? What are some things that we can look for? And what do you advise someone do besides calling CPS in those situations?
Well, gosh, that's a broad question because, it depends on where the child's coming from. And I think Dr. Bill could probably answer this question well, since he wears two hats, being a doctor and a law enforcement officer. And I know he's seen this as well in his practice. But if we're talking strictly illegals, right, let's just break it down by category: legal alien children that are here. It's first of all, look at the quote parent that they're with, and look at the siblings, because in most cases you're going to find a lot of these illegals live in homes with a quote custodial parent or relative that doesn't look anything like them, i.e. completely different ethnicity. And there'll be other children in the home that are of different ethnicities as well. So just use your eyes and survey the landscape. If we're talking about an American child, you have to sit down with the child in a room alone, outside the influence of their quote guardians, supposed guardian. And you need to, be very careful and ask them serious questions about their mother, their father. Get them to talk to you about their parents, about their siblings, and, see if in fact the people that they're with, the foster parents that they're with, find out, are they being exploited? You have to, there's a gentle way to do it. I am not an expert in that, by the way, but I've talked to people that do this. And like I said, Dr. Bill would be the better person to answer that question, because you have to gently probe these children and look at their response, look at their body language. Will they make eye contact? Are they looking down at the floor when they're answering questions, and are they just silent? Because children that are exploited clearly show signs of exploitation that is so different from a child who's not.
You raised such a good point. Awareness, first of all, is a critical factor, because your time to see something may be very brief. And
right.
Don't underestimate your gut feeling. When you look at a situation and it doesn't feel right, doesn't look right, you may not be 100% right, but you might be 100% right. And so, what do we say when we see something, say something?
Right.
It's really important. We see something, we say something. If I see something, it looks to me like that child looks like they would really like to be getting out of there, or I see signs and symptoms that indicate that that's not, they're not their parents, and maybe they've been trafficked or being trafficked or whatever. You wouldn't start with CPS on that one. You would start with law enforcement. You would, say, and so what if an officer were to show up and say, hey, this doesn't look quite right to me. Would you check in on it? Right. They would make the contact, right? The contact would be, hey, and they would do whatever they're trained to do to make that contact to see if A adds up to B, and is there any place else to go? And what's the worst thing that can happen? Nothing. Okay.
That's
but
right.
You might also find something. And so trust your gut awareness. You could teach a whole course on those kinds of things. But anyway,
And just a couple other things, Melissa, there's always signs of behavioral changes, whether it's sudden or not. And perhaps maybe, some of the other relatives that are known relatives to the child that might be able to speak to sudden behavior changes, or teachers, if there's teachers involved. If there's any sort of outward signs like as anxiety and depression, are they, being very secretive? Are they isolating themselves and avoiding talking about, anything or who they're spending their time with? Are they now really focused, maybe because they've been so sexually exploited? Are they using sexual or mature language, you know what I mean, around you or other people? And I guess lastly, are they in fear of uh, authority people, adults? Do they fear being around you? All of a sudden, are they cowering? Are they afraid of law enforcement or teachers or what have you, just because the authority figure in their life might be abusive? Other than the obvious physical signs, you've got to look at those indicators. You've got to look at, sort of the digital grooming aspects. Are they
Mhm.
doing anything online secretly? Are they escaping to certain bad websites? Are they getting a lot of text messages, phone calls? I've interviewed folks about, they've discovered their children's phone were littered with text messages from their teachers with inappropriate material. Have they created a bunch of social media online fake profiles? Are they sharing pictures? All that kind of stuff. You've really got to probe. And, you can't probably do it in just one visit and go, oh, I see a bruise, therefore you must be sexually exploited. No, it's got to be a little bit more deeper of a dive than just that.
One final question, Melissa.
Oh, yes. And so for example, I guess some of the things I heard you say, Anne, like I totally agree on them. But then I also know people who have kids who are going through like a puberty regression thing, like threatening to run away, doing all the
Sure.
locking themselves up in their room. Is there, how can we approach kids who are in that age, like, preteen age and all of that, and still make them feel safe, like they can talk to us if they are having issues with adults?
I think, you know what? I think you've just got to be completely open about the subject matter. You've got to say, look, this is not me saying, to my son or daughter, I think you're doing this. Perhaps use it in the third person. Hey, I've heard of some stories. There's some people that I've read stories about that are about your age. This is what's going on. Are you seeing signs of this? Ask them about a third person, fictional or not, it doesn't matter. But have the discussion as if there's another individual that fits this category and say, do you recognize any of that? See how, gauge it from there. But you can use it as a teachable moment, as an opportunity to educate them on the signs and signals of children that are being exploited or abused or sexually trafficked or whatever. And I think, depending on your ability to gain access to your child's online information, their cell phone, et cetera, as a parent who's paying the bill, I reserve the right to look at my child's cell phone whenever. And they need to know that, because frankly, at the end of the day, the government and everybody else is reading your messages anyway. So if they don't have, if they aren't willing to, to submit that and let you review that information from time to time, I would certainly say that's a breach of trust. And, don't judge them because they're using expletive language or they're, talking about stuff that you may think is a little edgy. I mean, you can if you want to, but you want to do as much as you can to keep the element of openness and dialogue there. And so if you start condemning them for everything, when you're really looking at the bigger picture, is my child, being sexually exploited? You've got to be able to go into that with that mindset. Like, I might suspect something's happening here, so I need to gingerly tread into this without scaring them off. Because if there is a real issue and they're embarrassed about it, chances are they're already under the manipulation of somebody else, and they'll try to escape, get out. They'll probably, try to run away, and you don't want that to be the case.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Anne.
And we're reaching the end of our show today. I wanted to get your final thoughts, your kind of overview for parents and families out there. And then once again, at the end, if you would give some resources for them as well, so that they can reach out if they're in a situation or know someone who is, for some help.
Great. So really, at the end of the day, our children are our children. They don't belong to the state. Just because you have a birth certificate and a social security card does not mean the state can impose their mandates, codes, rules, statutes through agency on anybody. That's not how it goes. That's not God's design. That certainly isn't our founding fathers' design when they drafted the love letters of our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. predecessed by our Articles of Confederation in between those two. That being said, American Made Foundation is a tool for resources. We provide education over there at AmericanMadeFoundation.org. And then AmericanMadeAction.org is our 501c4, where we are literally taking action. We don't have a large law firm to litigate individual cases. We use individual cases in some of our federal and state lawsuits because they meet a certain fact pattern. And we're really going after the due process violations right now. And we're using that to draft legislation to, in fact, mitigate the horrific legislation that's on the books and statutes that are on the books that incentivize the financial incentives to continue the business of child trafficking through Child Protective Services. So, if you visit our websites, AmericanMadeFoundation.org, AmericanMadeAction.org, we are open to hearing from you. And we also have a spot under our United Law Coalition where you can submit your documents and send us a message about your case. Because as I said, here in Florida, we're currently writing legislation. In fact, they're going to back into session in January, and they'll be taking our legislation to the floor from the Senate. And we are looking for good cases that meet a fact pattern of exposing these due process violations so that we can make that solid case as to why they need to modify certain statutes in their Child Protective Services DCF code. So we'd appreciate hearing from anybody and everybody. And we'll be taking this, like I said, nationwide and hopefully impacting legislation across the country with the ultimate goal to defund this and stand back up community resources like America's Future and other ancillary organizations that are there to support families in crisis.
And it's been amazing to have you on the show today. It's a really important topic that you've really helped bring out there, and I appreciate the work that you're constantly out there doing, always on the cutting edge of what's going on. And, my hat's off to you and all the work that you do. And
Thank you.
Appreciate you for coming on today. And thank you to everybody for coming on into In the Lion's Den today.
Blue lights and sirens, yeah, it's time to go. No time to defund us. You should know that we're not perfect. We're human, we're flawed. Just say to some grace for the sake of us all.